Hi friends, if you're enjoying this series and you'd like to help me reach even more people with thinking faith, please consider supporting the show. Silver supporters get early access to episodes and bonus content. Gold supporters also get signed books and a monthly catch-up with me. The links to support are with the show notes or visit justinbrierley.com. Enjoy today's episode.
I not only ceased all religious activity, but I also developed kind of this disdain for religion. My own storyline and experience so far had exhibited some pretty improbable things that seemingly conspired to bring me back to this decision point about the faith. I jumped on my feet and I walked all the way back to the back door of the church to leave. At the moment where I had one foot out the door, there was a big blast of chill that came in my stomach, going up in my chest and grabbed me by the throat. And I was frozen on the doorstep with goosebumps all over. And I heard myself thinking, this is ridiculous. I need to figure this out.
Hello and welcome to the surprising rebirth of Belief in God podcast with me, Justin Brierley. A bonus episode for you today, my interview with Guillaume Bignon, a French atheist surprising conversion. I'll introduce Guillaume in just a moment. We'll be returning to our documentary format next time as we embark on the final act of season 1. We'll be looking at some hard evidence that the tide is perhaps turning, especially among Gen Z in the West. It's been an absolute delight to be able to produce this series over the past year. I've been so touched as well by the wonderful feedback that so many people have left. Just a very quick shout out to Sean, who recently left this lovely review. I'm late to the party, but I can't stop listening. I've been a fan of Justin's podcast for years. This one takes it to a new level. The narrative expertly woven together, the story utterly compelling, and the message deeply poignant. I cannot recommend this enough. Bravo. Thank you, Sean. And if you can leave a rating and a review, it does help others like Sean to discover the surprising rebirth of belief in God. Now, many understandably have been asking, what's next for the podcast, Justin? Well, we've 3 more episodes of season 1 coming after today's episode. That'll take us to a total of 30 episodes for season 1, concluding right at the beginning of October. And at that point, this podcast will have largely tracked the themes of the book that it's based on. But fear not, because a season 2 will be coming. I've become more convinced as the series has progressed that something unusual is happening in our culture. But there are lots of different facets to it. I'm discovering them all the time. And I'm looking forward to exploring various aspects of this surprising rebirth story in season 2, including the way it's primarily drawing many young men, the political questions that surround it, the question of Islam too, and its influence in the West, and many more topics besides. Plus, I'll be sharing more stories of surprising rebirth with a number of guests along the way. And if you've got someone in mind that you think I should be speaking to, then do get in touch, justin@justinbrierley.com. So, when will season 2 launch? Well, the plan is to launch in the new year. So there'll be a few months break between the end of season 1 and the beginning of season 2 as we begin to pull together all those episodes and interviews. I should say that this first season has been made possible by the incredible generosity of people all over the world who've come on board to support the work of my new production company, Think Faith, as we produce this series and other resources too in video, print, live events and so on. So if you've enjoyed the podcast so far and you want to help fund our next season, as we seek to cover the staffing, editing and running costs and so on, please do consider supporting via regular giving on Patreon or a one-off gift via PayPal. And if you're in the USA, we also have a link to support via tax-deductible giving. Monthly silver supporters get early access to episodes plus bonus content, and gold supporters also get signed books and the chance for a monthly catch-up with me too. So do go to justinbrierley.com, or you can find the links with today's show to support. I can't tell you how much it means to me when you support these efforts of mine to bring thinking faith to the secular and Christian world. Again, thank you so much. Well, just before we get into today's interview, a quick update on my speaking engagements this autumn, or fall, as my US friends say, because I am coming out to the US this September Firstly, Sunday the 22nd to Tuesday the 24th of September, I'm really looking forward to being part of the Biblical Worldview Conference, taking place at Prestonwood Church in Dallas, Texas. Other speakers include Cambridge Bible scholar Peter J. Williams, apologists Lee Strobel, Sean McDowell and Ali Beth Stuckey, and conference host Jeremiah J. Johnston. I'll be there with my 19-year-old son Noah too, who's also speaking at the conference. So if you can make it, the Biblical Worldview Conference, 22nd to 24th of September in Dallas. But while I'm in the Dallas area, I'll also be speaking that same weekend of the 21st and 22nd of September at Stonegate Church in Midlothian, Texas. The exact time and date to be confirmed at the time of this recording, but the link will be with today's show. I'll also be speaking on the evening of Monday the 23rd of September at First Baptist Garland, talking there about the surprising rebirth of belief in God with a Q&A. And finally, before heading back to the UK, one more date in the US. On Wednesday the 25th of September in the evening, I'll be at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, speaking for the Blue Ridge Center, again on the surprising rebirth of belief in God. So that's events in Texas and Virginia from the 22nd to the 25th of September. And again, there's a link from today's show with more details. Then once I'm back in the UK, you can find me also on Wednesday the 9th of October in the evening, speaking again on the surprising rebirth of belief in God at Venture Church in Beaconsfield. Then on Wednesday the 6th of November, I'm leading a WebNet Leaders Day at Broadmead Baptist Church in Bristol. That's from 9:30 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon. Again, there are links to those speaking engagements too with today's show. Do subscribe, by the way, to my newsletter to be kept up to date as well, justinbrierley.com. All the link is with today's show, and I'll even send you a free chapter of my book when you subscribe. And one final thing, keep listening towards the end of today's show, as I'm also having a catch-up with Glen Scrivener of Speak Life about their 321 course. I know many people have been getting hold of the course since we've been advertising it here on the show in recent months. Right now, it's time to hear the surprising story of a French atheist's conversion to Christianity. Well, just before we get into the rest of today's show, someone we've heard from quite a bit on the podcast is author and speaker Glen Scrivener. Hello, Glen.
Hey, Justin. Always great to be here.
Well, for a while now, you've been happily pointing people to your online course 321. Where did that come from?
It's a passion of mine to help people get to grips with Christian faith and to do it in a way that's attractive and imaginative and deep and that assumes no prior knowledge. So 321 is my way of showing life according to Jesus. We want it to be like a mere Christianity for a digital age.
Okay, so that sounds like it's maybe more for those who are not Christians?
Well, yeah, many people have done it who are not Christians, and they've found faith for the first time. We're thrilled about that. But like with Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, Christians love that book too. And the first audience we have in mind for 321 is actually a Christian who wants to be refreshed in their faith and to have something to pass on to their Christian curious friends and family.
Okay, so Christian or not, this basically gets people to the heart of the faith.
Right, and nearly 10,000 people have joined the online platform. It's free. You watch these video-led sessions and you think through the stunning animations, you engage with the chat community, you get a ton of extra content thrown in, and now you have on your phone a Mere Christianity that you can share with others. So the phrase we're using is, you can share this without shame, without cost, and without delay.
Well, we've been really enjoying promoting 321, and listeners to this podcast can get into it instantly by going to 321course.com/JB. That's 321course.com/JB. Thanks, Glen.
Thank you, Justin. Keep up the good work.
Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by Guillaume Bignon. Confessions of a French Atheist is his most recent book, How God Hijacked My Quest to Disprove the Christian Faith. I've known Guillaume for several years now, but it's lovely to catch up with you again, Guillaume, to hear your story and some of your thoughts on, some of the reasons why you crossed the line to faith. How are you doing?
Doing great, thank you, and thanks for having me, and I'm enjoying the opportunity to have a discussion with you again.
Well, I brought you on because you're a good example of a surprising convert, and I've been talking to a number of surprising converts to Christian faith for my podcast documentary series, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God. Let's go right back to the beginning. Tell me about growing up and the kind of secular environment, really, that you found yourself in as a young man in France, Guillaume.
Yeah, so I grew up in France in a pretty loving family near Paris, and we were practicing Roman Catholicism. This was clearly what we were engaged in doing. But even though we were somewhat regularly going to church, it didn't seem to me like a genuine, sincere, actual belief in a real God who's out there and actually answering prayers and doing the sorts of things that the Christians believe that God does. So it seemed a bit more of a tradition than anything else. And for me as a child, it certainly was a bit annoying. This was not my idea of a good time. And so it was impeding on my Sunday mornings. So this was kind of our approach to religion, but we had a really good life, loving parents. I was the second of three kids. And it's only... So it is respected as a practice, but there was there's somewhat always the sense that there is something intellectually deficient about this. I did grow up in a culture where atheism is not necessarily demanded, but it seems to be the default position, and it's somewhat strange or criticizable that somebody would have a genuine belief in God. So when I was old enough to tell my parents that I didn't really believe any of this, and we were given the freedom to stop going to church, I not only ceased all religious activity, but I also developed kind of this disdain for religion, somewhat the unspoken assumption that if you actually believe those things, there's something wrong with you intellectually, and also that there's something a bit nefarious about some sort of a power-hungry control of the masses. So there's some resentment that grew up like that, and I suspect my experience was not very uncommon for people of my generations to grow up to walk away from the Catholicism in France that they grew up with and to see religion with that kind of somewhat hostility.
Yeah. So you probably would have happily continued as a sort of, secular, agnostic, not really even thinking about faith, I imagine, kind of person in France. But for the fact that you met in unusual circumstances, someone who did have a Christian faith. Tell us about what prompted you to start looking into Christian faith, Guillaume.
Yeah, so we're now in my early 20s. So I walked away from faith and I lived my life basically trying to have a good life as I understood it and to enjoy my life. So different pursuits I was after. I studied math, physics, engineering, and I ended up being a software engineer. So that was for my professional life. For entertainment, I was also playing volleyball. I grew up it was a late puberty, but I grew up to be quite tall and was scouted and started playing volleyball quite competitively. And so I would be playing the games every Sunday, going around the country, playing in National League volleyball. And I was also, when I was little, I played the piano, and then it turned into playing the keyboard, and I ended up playing in the band. So here again, in terms of pursuits of entertainment and satisfaction, I played music, recorded, played on stage, and really enjoyed this dream of being a quote-unquote rock star. And as part of also the array of interests and pursuits that I had, for an atheist my age in France, one important area was romantic conquest, like women. And so I also started to have enough success at this point to satisfy the expectations of a French atheist, with sometimes stories for one night or sometimes a bit longer stories. But this was an important center of pursuits for me as well at the time. So all of those pieces were somewhat the things that I ran after to look for happiness in life. And the drive to reconsider some of my life choices came in very unexpected circumstances. I went on vacation shortly before I was 25, went on vacation with my brother to the Caribbean, to the island of St. Martin. And on a day that we were going to a bit of a more distant beach, we decided to come back by hitchhiking, which was something I had never done before and I've never since done. But we didn't have a car. We needed to come home. And so we started hitchhiking. And after a few minutes, there's a small car that stopped with two American tourists in it. They were very attractive. One of them was a former model. And they were lost on their way from the airport to the hotel. They were just arriving on the island, and they didn't even stop to pick us up. They stopped to ask for directions. And so we asked them where they were going. And as it turns out, they were headed to the hotel that was literally next door to the house that we were staying at. And so we told them, well, we'll tell you where it is if you pick us up. And so they discussed quickly, and then they agreed to pick us up and to drive, and we showed them where it was. And so they were very attractive. So immediately we started to chat and try to make a connection so that we would see them again while they were on the island. And it worked out. By the time we arrived at their hotel, we made plans to see each other again. And this would be something that I would pursue here on the island. Hey, look at this American, very, very exciting. So we would see them again. And so we made plans to see them again. And we did. And long story short, I ended up involved with the one that was from New York. The other one was from Miami, but the former actress and model was from New York. And I ended up going out with her while on the island, which, again, was very exciting, successful. But then the bad news came in that she shared with me she believed in God, which I thought was crazy. Like I said, it's an intellectual suicide as far as I was concerned. And also just as problematic was the idea that somewhat related, I mean, because of her faith, she had a view of marriage such that she believed in abstinence before marriage. And for me at the time, certainly that was not what I wanted. And I thought that was a huge problem as well. So this was the dilemma that I was facing now, those hurdles standing in the way of having this amazingly romantic, like almost Hollywood-worthy story of meeting a foreigner in a strange land by random circumstances with a hitchhiking. And so this is when I was first reconfronted again to the question of religion and what I was going to do with this idea that God exists or that someone could be a Christian in this day and age.
Yeah, so that's sort of the introduction to really what got you starting to look into the question. Now, really, I think you went into this with a view to simply disproving the whole thing and hopefully showing this love interest of yours at the time that she should abandon such beliefs. So tell me sort of how that developed, because were you kind of, what did you do to sort of start to look into the question of Christianity, and what was your attitude going into it at the time?
Yeah, so after that vacation in the Caribbean, I flew back to Paris, and she flew back to New York, and we were basically what was in a long distance relationship. And I needed to make sure that religion wouldn't stand in the way. So what I did, it's important to understand that my atheism at the time was not, and like I suspect many of my fellow French atheists that age, was not the conclusion of a very solid study and thinking and reflection about the issues and things. In light of all the evidence, atheism seems to be the best worldview. No, it was kind of the unspoken assumption of the culture. And so there was a piece of me thinking, well, this is not going to be a big survey of the evidence of some sort. I didn't think there was such a thing. It was just going to be, well, how can I just talk her out of it by simply bringing a little bit of common sense to this question, and then we'll be done with this. So that's the background I came from. As I started to consider what kind of beliefs she might have, I realized I just needed to refresh because I had no idea what Christians even claim. And so one thing that I did is that I dug up in my belongings and found an old Bible that I thought, well, if I'm going to be looking into what she believes, I guess the Christians believe the Bible, I need to understand what is being claimed even. So I opened the Bible and just for my own understanding started to read it a little bit and started with the Gospels and reading what is said about Jesus and what are the claims that the Bible makes. And there's another thing that I did at the time. I thought, look, I'm a scientist, I'm an engineer. There's one experiment I can run about the whole thing. If allegedly there's some sort of a living God out there, then maybe he's interested in the fact that I'm looking into this. So I'm going to pray an unbelieving prayer. And I went and said, okay, fine. If there's a God out there, why don't you go ahead and reveal yourself to me? I'm looking into those things. So, I'm open. You go ahead and show up. So I wasn't really open, but I figured it wouldn't stop God if he existed. So that was the unbelieving prayer I ran. And like I said, I started to read the Bible, and there I was a bit surprised because as an adult reading the Bible, felt very different than what I remembered from my childhood, where all I had remembered was the boredom I experienced on the church pews growing up and in all sorts of religious activities. And here I was just in good faith reading the story of Jesus' life. And there was something very different about the person of Jesus that I found was really interesting. I found the person himself captivating. I thought he was incredibly smart. I think that he always had the right retorts. He would navigate through tough conversations. People were trying to trap him. So the brilliance of just the person and the fact that he amassed a certain following, that people were captivated by him, I found that very, very disturbing, if you will. So it was kind of like annoying. So some sort of okay, well, this is not the Jesus I expected. Okay, so here's an interesting character. But I didn't have any place for any of these claims about God or the supernatural, but just the person himself really caught my attention. So that I was a bit destabilized like that.
Yeah, so you were slightly taken aback then by what you were reading, but I guess the big question was, well, did any of this actually happen? Was there any kind of factual basis to this stuff? How did you start to investigate, that aspect of Christianity?
Yeah, so as I read and was captivated by what I was reading, there was some degree of a ring of truth as well to the New Testament. And at the time, I clearly was not in a position to phrase exactly what I saw that felt truthful or compelling. In later years, I've come to understand there are plenty of markers of truth in the New Testament that are fairly intuitive and that you can pick up without a fully analytical understanding of what they are. But they're, for example, they're nicely detailed in Lydia Magru's book, Testimonies to the Truth, where she goes through various signs of truthful witness, like undesigned coincidences or unexplained illusions, or external confirmations. So various things that are found in the Gospels that I couldn't have put words onto at the time, but I think somewhat picked up that, there's something compelling about this testimony here. So this is just the first pushback I had on reading the New Testament. And I was captivated by Jesus, but I was nowhere ready to even go to church, even if I wanted to, because even on Sundays, I had all of my volleyball games anyway. And that barrier actually didn't last long, because a few weeks after I prayed that unbelieving prayer, out of the blue, I got a shoulder injury, completely unexplained, but a few minutes into every volleyball practice, my shoulder started to be inflamed and I just couldn't spike. And so I was useless and the doctors couldn't see what was going on. The physical therapist's best effort didn't really help. And I was basically told, look, we don't know what's going on, but you need to rest your shoulder. You need to stop playing for a few weeks and then we'll see what happens. And so against my will, I was now forced away from the volleyball courts on Sunday mornings. And so on the first one without a game, I thought, well, look, it's Sunday morning. I have those Christians that I'm investigating what they're doing and what they're believing. I might as well go to one of those churches and see what they do. And so I went to a church that I knew was connected with the faith of my girlfriend at the time, found the address in Paris, and went on that Sunday morning. And I thought, the timing worked out because, again, it was shortly after I finally had my apartment of my own, which was absolutely necessary because I wouldn't have been able to assume and tell my parents that I was going to a church. That would have been absolutely crazy. But, I was on my own. It worked out. I went there and I drove to the church. I walked in. The band was playing. It was very different than what I was used to because the pipe organs of my childhood Roman Catholicism were long gone. You had drums on the stage and a modern worship band. And people were standing around. The service wasn't quite started. People were standing around and praying in groups. And it really looked like they were actually believing that a God was listening to their prayers, that this was kind of alive. And I felt extremely awkward. I felt oppressed. I think I was extremely self-conscious that even my presence in the building was already an intellectual crime, that just being associated to be there to even contemplate any of this, whether like, what happened? Did you just give up your mind? And so if any of my family or friends had seen me, I would have died of shame. So that kind of oppressive feeling was there as I very awkwardly walked into that church and sat down. And the service went, and I really enjoyed the music. I think they were really good musicians. Obviously, I couldn't sing the religious lyrics, but it was, wow. As a musician myself, I could recognize these people are doing really good stuff. And the pastor came and preached a message, which felt fine at the time, I suppose. I do not remember a word that he said on that day. I don't know if I was just too absorbed in my thoughts or if whatever happened. I did not remember a word that he preached. But I remember at the end of the sermon, I thought, okay, I've heard enough. I think I've got a good sense of what they're doing and what they look like. Now let me escape so that I don't have to introduce myself to anyone and I don't get stuck having to speak with these weirdos. And so I jumped on my feet and I walked all the way back to the back door of the church to leave. And I opened the door. And this is where, at the moment where I had one foot out the door, there was a big blast of chill that came in my stomach, going up in my chest and grabbed me by the throat. And I was frozen on the doorstep with goosebumps all over. And I heard myself thinking, this is ridiculous. I need to figure this out. And so I physically couldn't escape that church. I had to close the door in front of me, turn around, and I went straight to the head pastor. And I introduced myself. And I said, so you believe in God, huh? You really do? And he said, well, yeah, I do. I'm happy to explain how that works out if you want to. And so I said, yes, sure, I would love that. He said, well, we can make an appointment. Why don't you come and see me on Tuesday evening and we'll discuss those things. And I said, all right, fine, let's do that. And I made an appointment. Now, years later, he admitted that he didn't really believe that he would ever see me again, but but I did show up on that Tuesday evening. And so that opened a big avenue for me to reconsider a lot of the things that I held true.
Thanks to Gareth, who wrote in to say, whether you're a person of faith, agnostic, atheist, or none of the above, this series is both genuinely thought-provoking and inspiring. I could not recommend it highly enough. Leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts or simply posting about us on your social media helps others to discover the show. If you want to follow more of my work, why not get my fortnightly newsletter? I'll even send you the first chapter of The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God book for free when you subscribe. And if you'd like to support the show, you can get early access episodes and bonus content. Gold supporters will receive signed copies of both my books. For the newsletter and to support, visit justinbrierley.com or the links with today's show. This friendship you developed with this pastor, I understand you met on a number of occasions. You talked through the issues. He started to, well, he started to shake your presuppositions about Christians and about the intellectual basis of Christianity, because you found in him someone who actually knew what he believed and why he believed it. Do you want to just give us a sense of some of the issues you were talking through with him and some of the things that you started to put together through those conversations?
Yes. So there's a number of points that changed my mind in the course of this various conversation that lasted for a few months, where I would come and we would chat and would have long questions and answers and discussions. And what does the Bible say about this? And what do you Christians believe about that? And yes, some of my assumptions started to be shaken. The first one, like you said, is simply the fact that you could be intelligent and also a Christian. So this was one of my presuppositions, that, like I said, that somehow this was an intellectual deficiency to believe that there's a real God who does real things in the real world. And here was this guy who clearly believed this, not only believed it, but he made this the very center of his life as a preacher. And he seemed to be very smart himself. He didn't seem to be defective in any way. He was highly educated. He expressed himself clearly. Didn't seemingly need a crutch. And yet he believes that there's a God and that Jesus was risen from the dead. So this was very challenging for that presupposition that I was bringing to the table. And I started to think, well, look, it seems like I don't know about the arguments yet or the good reasons or what have you, but just the existence of this guy was already some evidence that you can be intelligent and also believing in God. So this was one part of the challenge that I was confronted with when in those conversations. Some of the topics that we discussed, we're focusing on some of my concerns with even the Christian affirmations. A major minefield for me was Christian ethics, particularly around sex and marriage. So that's something that he walked me through as well, to kind of show me, okay, here's the view of the Christian Bible. Here's how that works out in practice in life. And surely I had a distaste for this because of my strong urge and my own pursuit of women and the kind of pressures that culture puts on you in France for that. But he started to paint a more attractive picture. My own adventures in libertinism clearly had led to a lot of suffering as well. I had cheated and lied everything I could through all of the relationship before. And the idea of a more conservative view of relationships started appealing from the way that he described it. I mean, he shared that he hadn't even kissed his wife until they were married, and he could hear the words, "You may kiss the bride." And I thought that was absolutely insane. But there was something somewhat special and pretty about this, that, okay, they have respected this. And then, like, when they got married, you may kiss the bride, and here you go. So again, I wasn't prepared to do this myself at all, but he started to defend a coherent, consistent view of Christian ethics that started to look appealing, regardless of whether it was true.
That's so interesting to hear. I mean, obviously, that was going to be an issue that you were going to have to confront at a personal level, and we'll come a bit later on in your story to the way that became a kind of a significant moment as well, that moral sense of what you had done in some of these relationships, and the way that fed into ultimately your conversion. But as you were again starting to piece some of these pieces together, and you do a wonderful job in the book Confessions of a French Atheist, describing some of these conversations, and it wasn't just through this pastor. Obviously, there were other people who were feeding into the questions you had. But I know that, for instance, the whole question of miracles and science and so on was one issue. Obviously, at its core, Christianity stands or falls on the claim that Jesus rose from the dead. So were those sorts of issues ones that you were discussing as a sort of secular atheist, whether miracles could be true, whether we could believe the miracle claims in the Bible and so on?
Yeah, I think that was a big point of conversation with that pastor, whose name was Robert. And Robert had shared with me that, in his own life, he had some pretty miraculous encounters himself, and shared some of the anecdotes of what happened to him, and particularly his daughter, who was basically declared dead and in a vegetative state for all of her life, and then was actually raised and simply went on to be absolutely functioning, and the doctors were left shaking their heads. So he shared kind of that type of encounter he had himself with the supernatural. And I thought, okay, well, that's an interesting story. There's not much that I can make of this for my own faith, but he seemed to be saying, like, no, there is some modern encounter with the supernatural that one can seek and possibly encounter. But he did also very much focus on the fact that the core Christian supernatural claim is indeed the fact that Jesus was the Son of God who was risen from the dead. And this is something that I started to think about in terms of how could we possibly know whether it's true or not. And this is one of the big intellectual shifts that I started to have as well, was about the possibility of knowing things apart from either certainty or science. Right? These are the two pieces that I thought, I had kind of smuggled in as a presupposition that when we know things, like it's things that we can be certain of, or things that science gives us. And they are very naive presuppositions now. Anybody who studies a bit knowledge knows that this is actually not the only avenue for knowledge. First, because they are way too restrictive. There's lots of things that we know outside of science or without absolute certainty, but yes, we have knowledge. And because those two things are also self-refuting, right? I mean, the idea that you only know things that are certain is not something that you can be certain of. And the idea that you only know things through science is not something that you get from science. So for those reasons, my presuppositions were kind of shattered there. But I also realized, by analogy of some of the things that I knew for sure I knew, I realized my sources of knowledge are not all that much more respectable than what I'm seeing in the New Testament when I'm reading the stories of the various gospel writers. they are basically doing and telling you that that's what they're doing. They are giving you testimony. They're saying, we have seen, we've investigated, we've talked to the people. This is what we've observed. And they're telling you what they've seen Jesus do and say. And sure enough, there's an element of trust in those sources. But I realized that there's plenty of things that I knew from that kind of testimony. People tell me what they know, and now I know. And some things fairly fundamental, like my name, my date of birth, who my father is, what clinic I was born at. None of those things I have absolute first-hand evidence or knowledge about. It's simply things that I do know. I don't just believe them, I know them. But I know them because someone we knew told me. And so realizing those fundamental pieces of knowledge about myself were analogous to the kinds of testimony that I'm reading. So obviously there's the question of the supernatural, right? So how does that play into all of that? But the kind of source of knowledge that we're talking about was very mundane after all. And I realized it might not be crazy to simply believe that Jesus was risen from the dead on the basis of this reliable testimony that it happened. So that was a big shift intellectually for me.
So you'd gone into this thinking, well, it shouldn't take me too long to disprove this Christianity and to be able to hopefully persuade your girlfriend at the time of the same. But obviously things were going in a different direction. So were you feeling sort of, I don't know, a bit challenged, a bit almost worried that this might actually turn out to be quite different to what you had thought in the first place?
Yeah, they were clearly, so this is at the time where there was very important pull in different direction for me, because there was a very strong part of me that didn't want any of this to be true, right? I didn't want to sign up on abstinence before marriage. I did not want to sign up on going to church on Sunday mornings, on raising children in the Christian faith. None of this was even remotely appealing to me. And on the other side, I was also very attracted to this woman and wanted things to work. So both of those drives in opposite directions were susceptible to drive me one side or the other. But I quickly realized, when I kind of took a legal pad and drew a column and put like the pros and cons of this, I quickly realized none of those things are relevant to whether it's true. Right? The fact that I don't like it or that I don't want to sign up on the Christian ethics is irrelevant to whether it's true. Similarly, the fact that I would want to be with this woman is irrelevant to whether my beliefs about God are true as well. And so I did my very best to set all of that aside on both directions and to kind of look at some of the things that mattered for the truth of it. And so all of my bad objections to the Christian faith about needing certainty or needing it to come from science, or that it was stupid to believe in the supernatural, all of those things were solidly refuted in my thinking, in my conversations. And some of the positive pieces that came together, I came to value as actually evidentially important. The possibility of having knowledge by historical testimony, the fact that we could make a good case for the resurrection of Jesus. I had some of those pieces already coming in at a somewhat pre-analytical stage, right? So it's not like I was full-blown giving you an apologetic defense of the resurrection, but some of the pieces already came naturally and kind of jumped from the pages. The fact that the disciples did suffer or at least risk persecution for their proclamation of the resurrection was a piece that I noticed that doesn't quite fit. Why would they do that, aside from simply sticking to the truth that they had encountered? So those historical pieces came together, the possibility of knowledge by historical testimony, and my own storyline and experience so far had exhibited some pretty improbable things that seemingly conspired to bring me back to this decision point about the faith. And that, I think, has some evidential value to know that there's improbable events that match an independently given pattern, and you can infer that this has been designed, and it started to surely look like that in my own story. But I didn't want any of this to be true, and I also, intellectually, it started to make sense. But there was one sticking point that I just couldn't get over in my conversations with Robert, and it was my understanding of what he had described as the basics of the Christian faith, the gospel, the good news. But this is a question that I had, again, in my notes that I prepared at the time to discuss with him. It's all over the place. I still have those notes in French at home, and I see that question every other page is, why did Jesus have to die? I did not understand what the connection was between Jesus' death and my life as a Christian if I were to become one. So this was just a sticking point that didn't register. And he had walked me through the Bible and had seen some of the teachings. I just didn't understand it. And the understanding of that would come very soon, because as I started to demonstrate a bit more of an openness to the possibility that all of this would be true, I started to pray again more to God as an unbeliever, saying, well, I'm starting to think this might be true after all. If you're out there, seriously, I'm going to need you to reveal yourself to me pretty explicitly. And what I was hoping for was some sort of an open heaven with a light down and a voice saying, welcome, son, here I am. But what God did was much more brutal, and it's that he reactivated my conscience.
Okay, well, tell us about this bit, because this is pretty significant. What you've described so far is a very interesting journey of, what you might call a sort of perhaps divinely providential set of meetings and circumstances that led you to this intellectual pursuit and starting to uncover this. But as you say, there was this sticking point. Well, why did Jesus have to die? I guess you thought of yourself as fundamentally fairly good person, whether you called yourself a Christian or not. But that was soon, as you say, to be tested. And this is, I think, where the intellectual journey meets a very much a spiritual, emotional journey, in your case, Guillaume. And it'd be interesting to talk about that, in more general terms. But tell us what happened specifically, how your conscience got reactivated by God.
Yeah, so what happened is that in the midst of this investigation and the season of questioning and conversations, I had also independently come to do something really nasty, which is that I basically, as was always been the case in the past, I had cheated on my girlfriend and had done so this time in circumstances that were particularly aggravating. I don't share the detail in public of what exactly that involved, but there was some additional sinister details about how I had done that. And I knew I had done that, right? It's not like it happened besides me, but there was such an effort, like there was clearly a distaste from my own sake, like even by my own standards of the time, it seemed to be particularly nasty. And so I immediately, obviously, lied about it to cover it up, and kind of like pushed it away, like dissimulated. I just repressed it and kind of pretended and pushed it aside and lived as if I had never done that. And through this, in the season of seeking the truth and started to pray as an unbeliever, just grew a feeling of intense distaste at what I had done and guilt, and contemplating my possible life in the future with this woman. I just realized, well, I can't possibly start again something with, once again, this basis where I've cheated on her, and this is just going to be tainted, and the allegedly wonderful Hollywood story romantic meeting would be completely stained by this thing that I had done. And I had an intense sense of guilt that just was starting to be unstoppable. And I was literally afflicted with guilt for what I had done, appropriate guilt because I was guilty, but I felt tremendously guilty to the point where I was disgusted about this thing. And most importantly, didn't see a way forward. I thought if I even mention anything like that, then that's going to be the end of it. And I'm going to lose the relationship, lose everything. But I can't undo it. I cannot make it not happen. I have done it. There's no going back. There's no cleaning this up. And I was really distressed about the whole thing. And it's in that place of deep pain that finally, intellectually, the quarter dropped, and I finally understood that question that had resisted me for so long. Why did Jesus have to die? Me. The answer was me, because of my sins, because of those things that had basically made me guilty. The good news of the Bible, the good news of the gospel, is that Jesus is the one who died on the cross while he did not deserve to die, took on our sins. He died on the cross for our sins according to the scripture, so that we might be forgiven, not because we passed the test and are good of ourselves, but because we receive forgiveness when he takes on our sins, and it's a wonderful swap. And that truth finally clicked in when, in the light of my own guilt, and the message of the good news made sense of my experience. And I realized, look, this has been working me towards this. This is the message. This is the culmination. Yes, I'm all in. I'm going to give my life to God and say, yes, I received that sacrifice. I received that forgiveness. Please forgive me and change my life. And very rapidly, my guilt departed. It was literally washed. I felt like I had encountered God. I had encountered the powerful message of salvation through Jesus. And I was at peace with my Creator. He had forgiven me of my sins. So I did experience a very strong spiritual, experiential renewal of peace with God and knowledge that I have encountered the Creator of heaven and earth.
So this was a very significant moment, obviously, where the pieces came together, that intellectual journey met this spiritual encounter where suddenly you had this sense of forgiveness and peace. I guess that still left the issue of what happened with your relationship and so on. I mean, by this point, do you feel that it was at this point that you realized, well, I guess I'm a Christian now? And what did that mean then kind of for, I guess, your life, your relationship to this particular person who you were still carrying out this long distance relationship with in America?
Yeah, so this is where language is kind of funny, because I clearly had this powerful experience and felt like, oh yeah, I've encountered God and I'm on board. But I would have still found a strong distaste at calling myself a Christian. I was not ready for the label, even if the experience had already happened. So that took a little while for me to even put words to what happened. But yes, in terms of the relationship, so I did eventually fly back to New York, and I did confess what I had done. And it was extremely difficult. It was clearly I broke something there, and our relationship was clearly hurt, but she eventually decided to still give it a shot. So I came back in France. We tried to make it work. And at the time, it made much more sense for me to relocate if we were going to be together, because I spoke English. I would be able to find a job in New York. At the time, I worked in software development in finance. So to go to New York, that was a pretty natural fit. And so I made the decision to give it a shot. I thought that God had reclaimed me in all those ways and driven me there. And I thought, I'm going to follow this. And so I left my volleyball team. I left my band. I left my job. And I did find a job on Wall Street. And I flew and went to New York and tried to make it work with her. And this was kind of beginning of a new life, a clean slate beginning.
In the end, your relationship didn't work out in that instance, though obviously you can still thank that person and the circumstances that led you to kind of investigate Christianity for the fact that your life had changed in very significant ways. And it's a tremendous story. You now find yourself based in the US more or less permanently. You've obviously still got family back in France, Guillaume, but just kind of give a brief sketch of sort of how your faith and your vocation has developed since that quite extraordinary story of coming to faith as a young man in France.
Yeah, so this is where the relationship, like you said, didn't work out, and this was kind of God, I followed you all the way there. I thought you were in this, and what's happening? Our relationship was terrible. It would have been an absolute disaster if we had gotten married, and so by God's grace, we did break up. But I did find myself wondering, okay, well, now I've left everything behind, right? So volleyball, friends, family, my job, all of this. I find myself in this foreign land where I have my job, but then absolutely no social connections, no engagement, no nothing, plenty of free time on my hands. And it is just at the time that I started to exchange and receive questions from my family and friends in France, who I got to share the fact that I had become a Christian. I had believed those crazy things, and find myself very rapidly in the business of trying to explain to them why I had not lost my mind. And those conversations turned out to be both going really well. I didn't suspect that I would have such an upper hand in discussions about the rationality of Christian belief, but also felt very good to me, as in like, oh, this seems really meaningful, and maybe I'm in all of this because I'm supposed to do some of that work of explaining and defending the rationality of Christian belief. And so I did a lot of that, ended up studying a little bit more to answer correctly the questions and to read books. I almost never read when I was little, and then all of a sudden I was reading book after book and following the footnotes and watching debates and consuming like documentaries and articles on everything that was relevant to the truth of Christian belief. I enjoyed every moment of it. And because of this peculiar social setting I was in, I had no distractions whatsoever. So all of my evenings, all of my weekends would be spent just doing this and enjoying every moment of it. And it's after a few months of doing this, thinking, well, if I'm going to be spending all of my time and all of my resources doing this, I might as well get a degree out of it and see where this goes. So I ended up applying for seminary to get a theological education, and I had a master's in New Testament studies, and then eventually pursued further study by doing a PhD in philosophical theology. In the process, I did come to meet the wonderful woman that I eventually did get married to, my wife, Catherine. So she is American, and I jokingly tell people who ask me, well, how did you come to the US? I say, well, I came for the wrong woman and I stayed for the right one. And I'm very happily married. We have 5 kids. I eventually moved out of New York and into where she grew up in Virginia. So I no longer am on Wall Street. I now work for a tech company in California. And from there, I've developed somewhat of an apologetic ministry where I did study pretty intensely some issues surrounding the problem of evil, free will, providence, justification by faith, and the existence of God. And so you asked me about what kind of ministry God has brought into my life at this point. It's involving writing books, articles, speaking in various conferences and forums, doing some debates as well. Done a little bit in French as well, which has been interesting to bring some of that material to an audience that's mostly unaware of all the good apologetic resources you can find in English-speaking world. And that's kind of the wonderful ways in which God has blessed the ministry.
And I've just been delighted to see the way your vocation and ministry has flourished in that way, Guillaume, over the last several years. I've really enjoyed Confessions of a French Atheist. I highly recommend folks to get hold of that to read the story in much more detail. What I think is perhaps somewhat unique as well, though, Guillaume, is that you are rather an unusual instance of a atheist turned Christian from a French background specifically. And France, I have connections with France. My sister lives in France, and whenever I visit it, I'm reminded that it is a very secular country, arguably more so than the UK. And that perhaps goes back to its the foundations of the Republic in France, which was essentially sort of quite an anti-Christian, anti-Catholic at least sort of thing. But yeah, there is still that sort of nominal Catholicism which you sort of grew up in, which can often be more difficult sometimes, I think, to counter, because people think they know what Christianity, just as you thought you knew what Christianity was, but they of course don't necessarily. So what kind of opportunities and challenges are there for you to be able to speak to perhaps people who are in the position you were, several years ago, specifically in France? What are the unique challenges of speaking to that particularly secular kind of environment?
Yeah, I think that one challenge you correctly highlighted is the idea that people maybe think they know already what you believe. So I do find it helpful to kind of shock them right off the bat by sharing some of the things that my Christian faith looks like that they wouldn't suspect it is. And in that respect, one piece of theological knowledge that is clearly not present is this idea that we are saved by faith in Jesus and not by our good works, right? So on the judgment day, it's not our righteousness that's going to be evaluated by God, but that we would all fail at that judgment, but that we are only forgiven by grace and the fact that we place our faith in Jesus and receive the sacrifice. It's not a long story to tell, but it is one that I like to get on the table right from the start, because it is something that was surely shocking to me. Like I've explained, I didn't understand it. And when I did understand it, it was when God just punched me in the face to actually make me understand and realize that I needed this good news. But it's something that's helpful to explain that, okay, Christianity actually at its core has something really surprising that you should understand before we discuss whether it's true. So it's something that I've done that I found helpful to kind of put it on the table to say, look, this is something you probably don't know. So don't assume necessarily that you understand exactly where I'm coming from. This is what I think the New Testament teaches.
And I don't know whether you have any thoughts on how to kind of impact the generally skeptical secular culture of France in particular. But in my new book, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, I am noticing a number of secular intellectuals even starting to open up the God question again, partly because I think they are encountering in the West generally a meaning crisis of sorts. People who are looking for purpose and meaning and identity are finding that a secular materialist worldview just isn't doing the job. It's leaving them empty, shallow in some ways. I don't know whether you think that is also the case in France specifically. How if you were trying to kind of get the attention of the sort of the folk who probably in a very similar position to you, they're perhaps are trying to make a success of their lives. They've got their interests. Maybe it's sports. Maybe it's their love life. It's how do you kind of move beyond those kind of surface level things to help people think about whether there's a God and whether it makes any difference to their lives? Because I think so many people just simply never even operate on that level, do they? They just assume that that's irrelevant to them. That's just what strange old people do on their Sunday mornings if they feel inclined. I guess I'm just asking, how do you even begin to impact, what is such a post-Christian, widely secular culture like France, Guillaume?
Yeah, so it's intimidating questions about how do I change the entire culture, and I don't claim expertise about those things. But here's a tidbit that I can think of that I think is helpful, at least in my situation, probably would have worked out well, and it's to connect some of those endeavors that people have, right? So some of the things that they do care about, do care to do. And people do care to do lots of things, whether that's for their own purposes or because of more selfless interests. Various life pursuits are going to be present. And I think it's helpful to connect them to the more grand question of why. Like, why are you doing all of this? What's the meaning behind this? What's your goal, your ultimate goal in all of that? It is a bit of a dead end that I reached myself in pursuing my various goals that I thought would make me happy. Is like, is there more to life than this? Or another way of asking is like, is my own happiness the end? Like, is that supposed to be what I'm doing? And so there's a bit of that connection that can be drawn, and you can see it even in some of the French atheist writers who do raise question of spirituality and meaning. Luc Ferry is a very known French philosopher who's an atheist, but I know that he's often discussed, at least in the US. I hear of him quite a bit. And he's one of those that raised the question, like, what is the meaning of life? He's got books purely dedicated to that question. And he comes at it from an atheistic background, but he clearly senses that this is a big deal to answer. Like, what are we supposed to do? What is the meaning of life? What is behind this? Obviously, he doesn't give the correct answers in many ways, according to me. Although he does tend to center on like loving each other, right? So which sounds fine to me as a Christian, obviously. But I would say it's somewhat arbitrary if there's not a creator and designer of the universe who has an actual purpose for human beings. His view that we should love each other is no more or no less true or justifiable than if I just wanted to seek wealth or power or sleep or food. That is simply some of our pursuits. The Christian view gives us a grand narrative of a creator who has a purpose for what we should be spending our 80 or 90 or 100 years on this planet doing, and raising questions about why are you doing the things that you do and pursuing the things that you pursue seems to make a connection like that. I could name other French atheist philosophers who are interested in those questions. André Comte-Sponville is one that is very mediatic as well. You'll see him on TV a lot in France. And he did write a book. I think the English title is The Little Atheist Book, the Little Book of Atheist Spirituality. And he's asking, well, if you're an atheist, what's the place for spirituality? And tries to defend like morality and try to defend some of the things that are somewhat seen as more theistic than atheistic. But that does tell me there are some attempts to say, here's what atheism can still provide to you that maybe theism more robustly provides. So connecting those lines, I think, is helpful. In my story, certainly it was to realize that I'm looking after all of those pursuits. Maybe there's a grander narrative on all this. And as it turns out for me, there was, and God just grabbed my life and changed the narrative.
He certainly did. It's been fascinating hearing all about it. Thank you for spending some time with me to tell your story again, Guillaume. Again, if folk would like to read it for themselves, I can highly recommend Confessions of a French Atheist, How God Hijacked My Quest to Disprove the Christian Faith. I'll make sure that there's a link from today's show as well, where you can find Guillaume's story in full. For now, thank you so much for being my guest, Guillaume.
Thanks for having me, Justin. It's a pleasure.
I really loved that conversation. Again, you can find a link to Guillaume Bignon's book, Confessions of a French Atheist, with today's show notes. By the way, my conversation with Guillaume is available at our YouTube channel too. If you enjoy video as well as podcasts, can I encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel? It's simply called Justin Brierley, and some of the recent videos there include Guillaume, my full interview as well with Stephen Meyer about the return of the God hypothesis, and that video of my Edinburgh debate with Alex O'Connor, which has been very popular. Lots more content being added in coming weeks as well. So again, the link is with today's show if you want to check out the video. A pleasure now to be joined by Glen Scrivener of Speak Life, who's a friend of the show, has been involved in lots of the things I've been doing over the years. It feels like our paths have somewhat converged, though, over the last year or so, doesn't it, Glen? We're sort of thinking along very similar lines about what's going on in our culture at the moment. And the 3-to-1 course has been, a big part of what you see as potentially a helpful way to help people engage with the Christian story. Just tell us kind of where it came from and what you were trying to do with starting the 3-to-1 course.
Yeah, I think we are both seeing the same thing in terms of people being more Christian curious and more willing to engage with something that's deep and rich and ancient and weird, maybe, and not exactly a kind of a thinned out Christianity, but something that has a bit of substance to it. And I'm certainly discovering that around the UK, around the world. I think people are ready to go deep with Christianity, even if they've had no prior knowledge of it. And so 3-2-1 has been my way of explaining Christian faith for the last, 14 years. I think I first came out with 3-2-1. There was a little orange video that went around, and it was very big on blogs, and I remember that got shared very widely, kind of went viral, and I kind of figured out, 3-2-1 is this way of explaining Christianity that is deceptively simple because it's called 3-2-1, but underneath it's actually quite deep and rich because the 3 refers to Father, Son, and Spirit, and the 2 refers to the 2 Adams, Adam and Christ, and the 1 refers to being united to Jesus. And these are actually some of the most profound doctrines in Christian faith. But over the years, I've found a way of unpacking these in a simple way that really resonates with the Christian curious. The Christian curious.
I'm meeting more people describing themselves that way, or as lapsed atheists and things. So who do you think might find this interesting then? Because it's not, there's a number of courses out there. The Alpha course, other things, other sorts of introductions to Christianity. What I suppose is unique about 3-2-1 in terms of the way it helps people to engage?
One difference might be the packaging of it, so you can really engage with it online in a way that's very much built for digital. So you're not the only podcast who we've put ads on. You're in competition with Louise Perry, who's got her fantastic podcast, Maiden Mother Matriarch. And she's just, a wonderful podcaster and very open about being very Christian curious herself. And she's got a large following online. And so I haven't sort of revealed to you the statistics yet, Justin, but you're going head to head with
wow.
Louise. She's sending almost as many people as you are, and it's neck and neck. And there are people who are coming, for instance, from just listening to the Maiden Mother Matriarch podcast, sort of a feminist podcast, dealing with all sorts of issues. And they come and do 3-2-1, and we're hearing about people becoming Christians through that. We're hearing about people becoming Christians through coming through the surprising rebirth of belief in God, and they come through to the podcast. They come through to the course, and it's made for digital in that it's a space that is a little bit gated. It's not like YouTube, where if you watch one of our videos, the next video you're going to watch is determined by the algorithm. If you watch episode 1 of 3-2-1, the next thing you're going to do is episode 2. And you're also in a chat community, and there are also FAQ videos, and there's also a Bible reading plan that goes alongside it. And so it's kind of digital savvy is one way that 3-2-1 might be a little bit distinctive, but also the content of it. I've really wanted to go back to some of the great fathers and mothers of the church in terms of their theology. And so really diving deep into Athanasius and what he thought about the Trinity. That doesn't come through in the course. I don't name Athanasius, but it's very much taking some deep, rich theologians from church history and thinking this is not Christianity that is boiled down to a thin gruel. This is what Albert Einstein said. He said things should be made as simple as possible and no simpler. And we're very much keen on not doing the and no simpler thing. We don't want things to be too simplistic. So I think it's digital savvy, but it's also deep and rich and imaginative. And I think that's what people are encountering when they come and do it.
And how is it more than just, say, like watching a YouTube video where you might, have an interesting video, learn a bit along the way? I guess what gives it that kind of interactive edge that you're talking about?
So we're on a learning platform. We've tried to make it look not like a learning platform at all. We've tried to sort of gamify it in lots of ways and make it just look like your average app, your average online experience. But you give us your email address. We don't spam you and we don't charge you for any of this. But that just helps us to remember your progress. And so, you were halfway through episode 2 when you logged out. Now you're straight back in where you left off when you were last on the learning platform. And there's a chat community. There are all sorts of FAQ videos and bonus content that people can do. There's also a chat facility where not only are you conversing with one another, but you can ask Glen anything. And so people are on a daily basis, asking the author of the course, what on earth did you mean in episode 4, et cetera, et cetera. Or they could ask me all sorts of questions about Christian faith. We hold live events online where I am asked any question that people sort of have from all over the world. And we want to get into having live events in person as well. So it's very much leveraging what online community is already doing. If you really like the Rest is History podcast, for instance, with Tom Holland and Dominic Sandbrook, then, you get behind the paywall and then suddenly you're in a chat community and there's all sorts of live online events and there's live offline events. And we're really trying to do something like that in the realm of Christian evangelism.
So who are the kind of people that you've found are clicking through, are engaging with it? What kind of experiences are they kind of coming out the other end with?
All sorts of people, whether people first encounter it through a podcast and then end up doing it online, whether it's churches who are running it. So we've got nearly 10,000 people who have done it online, and we've got nearly 200 churches that have run it in person since October. And those people are starting to meet one another, and then the people who have done it online are then realizing, there's a church in Oxford that's running this on a Monday night. Fantastic. And the offline community is sort of mixing with the online community in those sorts of ways. My next door neighbor, has done it's so interesting that my next door neighbor has become a Christian in the last couple of years. And I've probably shared the faith as much with him digitally as I have face to face, even though we talk on an almost daily basis, and I'm always talking about Christian things with him, but I'm also sharing about stuff from 321, and I've shared him episodes of the surprising rebirth of belief in God, and so much of my evangelism has already happened digitally with him, even though he's in person. And I think that's so important about what evangelism looks like. When you think about online evangelism, you're not thinking about evangelizing pixels or evangelizing like these digital beings. You're evangelizing real people, and it could be your brother-in-law. It's just that you happen to WhatsApp him the YouTube playlist or whatever it is. And so it's people from all kinds of walks of life, Christian curious, kind of non-Christians who are leaning in, but also Christians who just want a refresher in the faith. And there's loads of people who have just told us, I wish I could become a Christian all over again, because the goodness of the God who is Father, Son, and Spirit, for instance, has just refreshed my heart again. So it's like Mere Christianity. If you've got Mere Christianity on your shelf, you as a Christian have probably read it, and it's probably done your soul much good. And it's a great resource so that you can then pass it on to your friend or neighbor if they're interested themselves.
Well, it is a resource that I think is perfect for this moment, because I'm getting a lot of emails from people who are listening to this podcast, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, who are saying, well, what next? What's the next thing? Because I'm hearing lots of things and I want to kind of investigate. And this is just, I'm just so confident when I send them in your direction, Glen, for the 321 course, that they're going to get a good experience here. It's non-cringy. It's really helpful, and it's got that element where, you can kind of go on a journey. You're not sort of just left to sort of figure it out for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, we often say we want to share without shame, without cost, and without delay. And that sharing without shame thing is really important to us.
Absolutely. And I guess it can also be done in that more traditional kind of setting of a church scenario and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so nearly 200 churches have run this in an in-person meeting since October, and we have a goal to be shown or to be experienced in 500 different churches by the summer of next year, and we're well on course for that. And what's really encouraging about that is, as we get more and more people doing it in person and more people doing it online, those communities start to meet together, and the online starts to become the offline, starts to become the embodied and the in-church. And the fact that it's the same resource, but held in these multiple kind of formats, I think that honors the way that modern people live in the year 2024. This is how all of us are living. Sometimes we're in person, sometimes we just have to do it via Zoom or something, And so a resource that works on both platforms, I think, is a resource that actually speaks to people in the way that they process all kinds of information, not just Christian faith.
Well, as I say, I'm really pleased that it's there. And I do feel like something interesting is happening in the culture. We've spoken a few times about this, Glenn. I'm always waiting for your latest video commentary to drop on, Ian Hersey Ali or Alex O'Connor or whoever it might be. But I think we're both recognising that there's been a shift. And I feel like this is such a helpful way in which we can help people who are also feeling like that shift. So many people who have been getting in touch with me saying, I resonate with your podcast because this is my journey. This is where I've been. And so it's so nice, helpful to be able to say, well, if you want to take that journey a bit further, check out 321 course. So thank you again for it, Glenn. And I'm sure we'll have you back on in all kinds of different ways. And we're cooking up some plans together for some joint projects as well in the future. But for now, I can just I'll love you and leave you and just say, if you're listening and you want to get involved, get on board, perhaps someone for whom this could be really helpful, perhaps it's you who would find this helpful, do go to the link. We'll make sure it's with today's podcast as well, 321course.com/JB. That's 321course.com/JB. For now, thank you for joining me, Glenn.
Thanks so much, Justin.
Well, thank you for being with us too. Feel free to leave a rating and a review of the podcast. Let us know what you thought of Guillaume's story. The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God is a production of Think Faith in partnership with the Jerusalem Trust and Genexus. Editing assistance today came from Peter Byram. Just a reminder that we would value your support as we prepare to bring you season 2. And of course, supporting brings you early access to episodes, bonus content. Gold supporters also get signed copies of books and a monthly catch-up with me if you'd like it. justinbrierley.com for more details. The link is with today's show. Coming up next time.
I'm on several text threads with different pastors from different locations in the United States, and it really began like different threads with different pastors who don't even know each other, but I kind of know all of them. We're texting each other saying, "Hey, are you guys noticing this? Is this happening where you're at?" Like, what's almost like they were perplexed and puzzled by the amount of energy, spiritual energy that they were suddenly feeling. I've been hearing this for the last couple of years, and then several things started to fall right in a row.
Is the tide turning? We'll be exploring the Asbury Awakening and rumblings of revival among Gen Z. That'll be the first in our final 3-part act of the Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, Season 1. Of course, you can get that episode right now, early, when you become a silver or gold supporter. And of course, your support will help us as we make preparations for Season 2. For now, thanks for being with me today. See you next time. Thanks for listening today, and to Ellis, who left this review saying, "One of the best podcasts I've ever listened to. Historical, insightful, reasoned, and full of heart. So necessary in a culture that has forgotten why it is like it is. just bought the book too. If you can leave a review, it helps others to discover the show. And if you want to buy the book, like Ellis did, you can get a signed copy from my website. As it happens, gold supporters of this show get signed editions of both my books anyway, plus lots of bonus content and early access. And of course, your support makes a huge difference to me being able to produce this podcast. So for the book or to support, visit justinbrierley.com or follow the links with the show notes.